Welcome to the second episode of our Industry Insight Series podcast. In this series, we hear the story of inspiring women working in the consulting space. Today, we're thrilled to have Grace Naughton, who is currently working as a consultant at Appian. Grace, thank you so much for taking part in this podcast. We are really excited to hear you speak about your experience in the consulting industry. So before we start our interview, would you like to give our listeners an introduction of yourself and your role at Appian?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So just a bit of background on myself. I'm originally from a rural town called Bowral. I moved to Sydney to start a Bachelor of Science in 2017 after doing a gap year overseas. So I did a Bachelor of Advanced Science. I majored in chemistry and financial mathematics and statistics, and I graduated from that in 2019. So I started work in 2020, which was an interesting time because obviously that was at the beginning of the pandemic. So I had actually been flown to Washington, DC, which is where the headquarters for Appian is based, to do my training. Unfortunately, I only got a week through that month-long training and then had to fly home. But since then, I've been working for essentially the last year and a half here in Sydney at Appian. I'm a consultant in the customer success team. And just actually some background on Appian. So we're a low-code automation company, and we build platforms to help automate and improve business processes. So we work for companies in banking, in health insurance, universities, a broad range of different industries. And we build either customer-facing or internally-facing web-based apps.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear. So I guess to start off, how's the training like in Washington? What is a day-to-day life before you started your role before you officially started your role at Appian as a consultant?
Yeah, so the training, so me coming from a science background, I hadn't necessarily done much coding. Now that's not vital to gaining a role here because as I've said, we've got that month of training, and so Appian's really fantastic in terms of providing support and training throughout the onboarding experience to make sure that we're equipped with the right skills. So that month of training, it's really immersive, and it's a great not only learning experience but a bonding opportunity with your colleagues to get a really great understanding for the company and its ethics and all of that. So in that month, there's a couple of different sections involved in the training. We have some general onboarding for the company itself, your usual HR, all of that type of thing, getting your computer. We also have the boot camp, and that's where, for people in customer success, that's where we really get our first exposure to the software. So Appian has its own in-house software that uses a language called Sail. And so that's our first opportunity to really get to play with that and see what that's like. At the end of the academy, as it's called, we have a presentation where we build our app for the week. So I did something based on university admissions. And so during that week, we get all of the support and learn how to actually use Appian. And by the end of it, we've come out with, something that actually works and someone could interact with, which is really cool, especially for me who had never really done much coding. I touched on R and MATLAB throughout university, but then to come away from that first month of training and actually be able to build an app was pretty incredible.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting to hear that you don't really need a technical or coding backgrounds for your role your role at Appian. How do you think your degree in university have helped you in your role at Appian as a consultant?
Yeah, so speaking broadly, it's definitely beneficial when people have, any experience with other relational databases like Oracle or SQL Server, but it's really not necessary because of all of that onboarding and ongoing support. In terms of my degree in setting me up for this role, so obviously I did chemistry and maths. I'm not here running regression analysis, and I'm not running a spectroscopy machine and analysing different chemical substances. So I haven't necessarily taken any of those specific skills, but a lot of the soft skills involved, and similarly for yourself in your actuarial studies, it's a lot of the soft skills, so around the analytical thinking and the problem solving that our degrees enable us to have is really beneficial, as well as the communication. I think in any kind of STEM degrees, the ability to read and digest data and then be able to communicate that back verbally or visually or numerically, whatever it is really important. And so all of those skills can be transferred into my role at Appian and into consulting more generally.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the introduction. So I guess I'll start at the beginning of your career journey. Like, would you like to tell us more about why you moved to Sydney to pursue your degree back in 2017?
Yeah, so obviously from Farrell it's a small town. The school I went to only had less than 400 people in it. So if I wanted to pursue any further studies, you really had to move out of the Southern Highlands. Sydney's always been, attractive. It's close enough to home that I can still drive down to the family, but it's far enough away that, I can build a new life for myself essentially and have access to all of these new and exciting things. Sydney Uni was a great university and I loved my time there. And I'd always, when I was at school, I'd never really known what I wanted to study or what I wanted to be. And, I'm still figuring that one out. But when I decided to study a science degree, I based that choice off how broad my career opportunities would be upon completing that. And as I said, the skill sets that you learn in any STEM degree, I think it's not necessarily those, the very specific niche skills or understanding that you get, but it's those soft skills surrounding any analytical or communicative degrees that really set you up for a whole breadth of opportunities. And then in terms of consulting, so same as I was in high school, I was doing my degree and I was still thinking, I'm not quite sure where I want to end up. And in probably my second year of uni, I heard about consulting for the first time. I'd never really even known about it as a job. And so to me, that was just so alluring, the idea of being able to work in, a whole range of industries and have a job that's always changing was really, really attractive to me. And so that's when I started to just go to more and more networking events and more career information sessions to see what type of consulting roles were available. And then honestly, I never really imagined myself ending up in a tech consulting role. I kind of just chanced upon that. I went to an event and met the HR Courtney for our company, and we got along like a house on fire. And just hearing about her passion for the company and all of the opportunities available, I applied and haven't looked back since.
Oh, that's really great to hear. And I would say this is how I also discovered consulting back in my second years, like for the reason that you mentioned, like it's really exciting and it's like you learn something. There's a saying that there's no how do I say this? Sorry. There's no, like, if someone asks you what is a typical day in your life, your day is different every single day, and you get to work on different projects and you get to work with different people. I guess this is something that appeals to me about consulting as well, definitely. Yeah, like before stumbling consulting, what career pathway would you envision pursuing?
I really hadn't thought too far into it. I loved science and I really, really enjoyed studying chemistry. And I guess the more traditional path for anyone in my degree would be to continue on with honours and perhaps a PhD. And a lot of those roles would lead into research science or working in a lab. And as much as I enjoyed that work, I really began to realise that I'm the type of personality who enjoys working within a team and being very collaborative and learning new things all the time. So I think that's when I realised I probably wasn't cut out for life in a lab. And so other than that, I hadn't really thought too deeply into it, to be honest. I think that's important in itself, to be able to keep an open mind and always be looking for new opportunities and not to pigeonhole yourself too early in your career or your learning into a specific role.
Definitely. Perfect. I was just going to ask you, like, how would you describe a typical working life as a consultant at Appian, and how does your life difference between 2020 and 2021, where in 2020 is mostly online, and when 2021, when people start to get back to the office life?
Yeah. So, obviously I started mid-pandemic, had to fly back to Sydney and quarantine and continue my onboarding experience there. So I never had the normal office experience when I started my role. In saying that, I know that I had a lot of other friends who were graduates at the same time, but Appian was very, very good at ensuring that we kept up some of those social things. I mean, we had virtual happy hours every week. There was a lot of effort put into the new starters like myself to make sure that we were still getting as much of an office experience as possible and ensuring that we were still making all of those connections and meeting all of the people in the office. So predominantly last year we were working from home. We've still got a very flexible working from home policy at the moment, but as I was saying earlier, it's our return to office week this week. So we've got heaps of events in the office. We're in every day. We've got breakfast and lunch and all these exciting things happening to try to encourage everyone to come back into the office and build back that sense of community. And then in terms of my day-to-day job and what I do for work, as you said, it is very varied. Being a consultant, it depends a lot on the project that I am currently on. So in the past year and a half, I've been in a few different projects and they really vary in terms of length and what we do in them. So for example, I was on a project for about almost a year, building out a big application for a trust company. So when you're on a longer term project, your days are a little bit more structured and your week to week is a little bit more consistent. Since then, I've been on a couple of other projects, ranging from 1 week to a month to 2 days. And so that's all really exciting because it means that I'm constantly being able to work with other people and other industries, which is great from a learning perspective. And then in terms of the work that I actually do on the project, my days generally consist of, in the morning, we'll have what we call a stand-up, and that's our daily meeting where all the Appian team and the client team will get on a Zoom call and discuss, our agenda for the day, what we did yesterday, any help we might need, any resources we might need to complete our work for the day. We'll be analysing any business requirements there to help in terms of our process modelling and improving the business processes. We'll be asking any questions or getting any clarifications as needed there. And then a lot of the day is spent developing the software to meet those requirements and do all of that.
Oh, definitely. So I was wondering, what are some of the relevant hard and soft skills that you think is really important as a consultant, especially in the tech consulting space, that you would recommend students to upskill on?
Yeah. So as I said, Appian is a low code, and we provide a lot of the support through the onboarding experience and continuously throughout our employment here. So I can't speak broadly for all tech consulting because I'm sure that there will be specific roles where a solid understanding of a particular coding language or skills will be required. Yeah, in terms of Appian itself, as I said, familiarity with different databases is beneficial, but again, not necessary. Speaking personally, I had no idea and I've learned it all on the job, which has been great. Other than that, the technical skills, I think, is just really important to have that analytical mindset to be able to identify, any issues or patterns or behaviours that we can improve or change or implement in order to make the business more successful. And then in terms of soft skills, I mean, as a consultant, it's really important to be able to communicate clearly. And so that's not just in the way that we're presenting, our own thoughts and our own communication, but in meeting with clients and other team members and being able to facilitate conversations to get a really solid understanding of what needs to be done or a solid understanding of the business. Obviously, as a consultant, I could be coming in, for example, the 2-day engagement I did last week. I had no familiarity with that industry, and so very quickly I'm having to learn from the clients. And so it's really important in situations like that to be able to lead conversations and get a really clear understanding, from people that you've never worked with before. Also, I mean, there's all those buzzwords, right? Like agile and dynamic. But in reality, I mean, that's exactly how it is. You need to be very readily able to adapt to new situations or unforeseen circumstances. We work in, it's called it's an agile methodology as opposed to waterfall. So we're working and we're learning as we're building. And so it's really important that, as we find out things along the way, and sometimes those things might, drastically change the outcome, we need to be able to manage that seamlessly and ensure that we're able to continue on in a constructive manner.
I was just wondering, because kind of going back to the day in the life of a consultant, like how is it like so I would say, like, what would you be able to, as a consultant, out of curiosity, would you be able to pick project that you really want, and what is the what's going to happen after you pick your project, or after your manager assign your project? What is the stages involving managing a project with a team, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we don't necessarily, I can't just say I want to do this project. Obviously, it depends on resourcing and what projects are available, but our managers will definitely listen to our interests and try to align those where we're available. And then in terms of onboarding onto a new project, so it depends what phase the project is in. So if it's a development phase, that's where, we'll have those daily meetings, we'll get the requirements and we'll implement those. We also have a couple of other phases. So one of those is called the discovery. That's what I was involved in last week. And that's where we're meeting someone for the first time and really just trying to get a handle on their business. And that's a lot of meetings, where we're just with the clients very heavily. Usually that would be in person, but again, we've transitioned. Really great to be able to facilitate that virtually. So that's the discovery phase, where we're really just getting an idea of the client, their business and their issues and their vision. There's also another phase which we work in sprints, and sprint 0 is where we do all of the storyboarding. So that's where we break these little business requirements into things that we call user stories. And so that's to get from a user perspective, a functionality or a requirement that they need. And so for those 2 weeks during sprint 0, again, it's very heavily focused on client meetings. And again, communication, collaboration. We might do things like mapping out an entire business process. We might be building prototypes. We might be building interface mock-ups, all of that. And again, that's a really exciting and fast-paced part of the development cycle. And then one of the other phases in a project is called hardening. And that's when we've finished all of the development, all the users are doing their testing, and we're just ensuring that in advance of go live, that the system is functioning as expected, implementing any enhancements that the user might want, and just really rounding out the project to its completion.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Perfect. I guess moving on to the next question is, like, what do you think are the most common misconceptions people have towards a consultant?
Yeah, well, again, consulting is such a broad term, and I think honestly it's often associated with being very fast-paced, often long hours, which isn't necessarily true at Appian. I think that we work a very standard way. We're not necessarily those management consultants who are working all hours of the day. So that's probably a stereotype that we don't necessarily equate to, but definitely everything involved with a consultant, being involved in a wide range of industries, meeting heaps of new people, I'm meeting new stakeholders all the time. It's really great to be building those relationships, and also the teamwork side of things. So we're always working in teams in all of these different engagements. Again, those team members change depending on the project or who's available, but it's really great to have that support and that ongoing camaraderie with all of the team here in Appian.
Yep, definitely. I was just going to ask you, like, what were some of the misconceptions you have heard about throughout your career about the role of women in the consulting industry?
Sure, okay. Well, speaking from experience, I mean, this isn't necessarily a misconception, but I was applying for a lot of different consulting roles when I was in my final year, or even my penultimate year when I was applying for internships, and definitely did notice that there was a much higher presence of men in terms of not just the applicants, but also the interviewers. So I think as a industry holistically, it probably is male dominated, but I think not that, this is difficult because I don't think it's a misconception. I believe that all of the women who would be watching this would absolutely believe that they have all the power to fulfill those roles as well. So I think it's important to realize that although there may be a misrepresentation of women currently in the consulting field, that absolutely has no bearing. You know, I think it's interesting actually because as I said, there's definitely more males in the consulting field. So I'm part of a minority being a female in my office here. But I definitely think that as a woman, you can really bring a different quality to the meetings. I mean, every varied perspectives are so important in any form. You know, diversity brings so much to any meeting, any conversation. So I think, yeah, women in consulting need to be empowered more and encouraged to really apply for these roles, because even if you don't see, you know, people like yourself in these roles, it's really important to apply for them and gain that experience.
Definitely. That's really good to hear. Good to hear. Like, is there any like support or network that Appian is offering for the employees to kind of support the women in consulting space?
Yeah, there's actually, so Appian, we have all of these things called affinity groups. So we've got things like Appian Green, which is based on the environment. We've got things like Appian Pride, Appian Heritage, Appian Rise, which is about supporting all of the younger members to continue their professional and personal development. And we've also got an affinity group called Appian Women. The Appian Women is dedicated to celebrating and encouraging all of the females in the company.
I guess also going back to the typical working life as a consultant at Appian, because from what I know about consulting is that it consists of people from a wide range of backgrounds, right? So I was wondering, what if you were to work with a group of consultants in a project? Like, how would the role of each consultant differ in each project?
So it depends on the size of the project. So sometimes we might have an Appian team of up to 8 people, or sometimes we might have a pod with only 2 to 3 people. And so generally on each of the development teams, we'll have some consultants. And so within that, there's a different range of roles based on experience. So we have associate consultants, which are generally the graduates. We have consultants such as myself, who have a couple more years experience. We have a senior or a principal consultant, and they're definitely the more experienced end of the spectrum. So we'll have a couple of consultants who are doing most of the development work. We'll also have it's called a TDM, which is a technical delivery manager. So again, that's one of our more experienced colleagues who oversees the project as a whole, and they might be looking after a couple of projects at the same time, whereas a consultant will just be working on their one project. And then we also have a role called an architect. So they're the person who is much more responsible for the technical design and ensuring the back-end support for whatever we're building.
I was wondering, how have other people inspired you at any stage of your life, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, starting out from high school, I had an incredible chemistry teacher, and who always facilitated the growth and support, particularly of the female students, because again, I went to a small school. There weren't that many girls in my class, so he always went above and beyond to make sure that we felt confident and strong in ourselves. And obviously I went on to then study chemistry at uni, so that was a big impact on me. And then throughout university, I've always just been inspired by those who don't adhere to boundaries, whether that's, set by themselves or set by others. I'm always very respectful of people who continually push the boundaries. They don't give in to any stereotypes put on themselves. They're always trying to prove people wrong. So I'm always been inspired by people like that. I similarly if someone says that I can't do something, I like to prove them wrong and show them that I can. So anyone like that I find really inspiring. And then in my career here, we've got in particular a couple of female colleagues here who have just been so successful, starting out as a graduate at Appian and within 4 or 5 years having a role as director. So career progressions like that are totally inspiring, because it's something that I can relate to, and that the means to acquire something similar is within my grasp.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely really inspiring to hear. Like, I was just going to ask, what do you see yourself in 5 years? This is a cliche question, but that's also my favorite question. It's like, what do you envision yourself in 5 years in your personal life and professional life?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? Sometimes I don't even know what I'm doing next week, next year, let alone 5 years' time. I definitely see myself staying here at Appian, I mean, the more I work here, the more I'm just so appreciative for what a great company it is. And I really love working here. I love my role. I love the people I work with, and I love the company as a whole. So I definitely have no plans on leaving here anytime soon. In terms of my role here, I definitely want to continue as a consultant. For the meanwhile, I want to continue building those relationships with other people, getting exposure to all of these different industries, and building my own experience and capabilities in developing our software. Longer term, after that, I'm not sure whether I'd want to keep on in the current team, which is customer success, which is primarily involved in the development phase, or if I would consider something a little earlier on in the sales cycle. So we have a team called Solutions Consulting, and they effectively are building out softwares, for the sales pitches and things like that. So that would be interesting. I'm not sure if I'd look to pursue more of a managerial role. I mean, the other thing with Appian is, so in Sydney, we've got about 50 people in the office, but we're growing pretty quickly. And so that should mean, given another 5 years, there should be a huge breadth of opportunity for me to pursue, any particular career path that I want. There should be, heaps and heaps of opportunity to continue that here internally at Appian. And personally, I mean, I'm really not sure. I think I'll definitely still be living in Sydney. I just moved to Coogee. I'm loving my time by the beach. I've just started to learn to surf. So maybe in 5 years' time, I'll hope to actually be able to surf properly and be standing up on my board.
Oh my gosh.
I'm also learning Spanish. So maybe in 5 years' time, I'll be fluent there. And I mean, personally, I'd love to be able to travel again. I was lucky enough just before COVID hit to get a couple of months backpacking in Central America. But another goal would be to really take some time off and go exploring some more.
Yeah, definitely. Oh my gosh, firstly, I think we live really close to each other. I live like less than 10 minutes from Coogee.
Oh, nice. It's a great area.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really good view. I think it's really good to live next to a beach so you can watch the sunset. I don't know, when you're stressed or something. But
yeah, that's exactly what I do too. Whenever I'm feeling stressed, I'll just go and watch the sunset and I go, oh, everything's fine.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely resonate about speak languages. I'm actually learning so I'm learning my 5th languages at the moment. So I'm learning Korean a little bit. Still.
Did you say 5th?
Yes, I'm fluent.
Wow.
Yeah, I would love to be fluent in Korean in the future. I'm still learning it, but hopefully in 5 years I can be fluent in Korean eventually. But yeah, perfect. I was just going to ask you because I think one of the most common misconceptions, like you mentioned about consulting, is the long working hours, right? The work-life balance. So I was just going to ask you, how do you manage your time? How do you manage your time? Do you have any tips for managing your time and stress effectively?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been a big learning curve for me as well. Managing your time is probably one of the most important skills to have, not just as a consultant, but I think as any working professional, especially when you're working in teams. In terms of managing time, I think the most important thing to really do is to be managing expectations around work. So I've had other friends or colleagues or, anyone in my life who I can see if they're getting really stressed or they're working really long hours, I think often it's due to just not being able to manage those expectations around, say there's a particular piece of work that needs to be delivered, talking to whoever needs to be involved in that conversation to, because often when people are working late hours, it's because something unforeseen has popped up. So I think the most important thing is to manage expectations. If the scope of something has changed and you're trying to get it done, I think it's really important to involve the stakeholders or whoever else to ensure that, if that's out of scope, you say, look, that wasn't part of the original plan. I need to continue on with this. We can come back to that later, or to be able to break things down into smaller deliverables and all of that. I think, so managing expectations, I think, is really important. There's no point suffering in silence and, just head down and grinding through something, because there's always support to be had or, there's scope to be changed. Other than that, I think it's really important to schedule time in your calendar. And so for things like training, or if I have, something outside of project work that I need to be done, I'll always block that time out in my calendar. Even if I need to rearrange that, at least I've got, that hour in my calendar and I can move that around. I also really try hard to not work past 5:30. I don't want that to become a habit, so I really try hard to get all of my work done, whether that means waking up a little bit earlier the next day and starting 8 o'clock or something, and starting a little bit earlier. I think it's really important to try to, where possible, obviously different things arise and projects are different, but I think it's really important to try to set some boundaries within yourself, especially when you're working from home, because it's very easy for time to just bleed from 5 to 6 to 7 if you're just sitting at home working. It's really important to be able to maintain a sense of schedule in your workday.
Yeah, definitely. Completely agree. I actually have a few questions for you as well. I'm just gonna go through it. So I guess looking back, right? What is something that you wish you had known when starting your career, or is there anything that you wish you know when you were in university?
In terms of what I wish I knew at university, is just that everything changes all the time. Nothing is static. Who you are and what you want to be is always changing. Roles are dynamic. Nothing is ever set in stone. I think sometimes when you're in university, it can feel like that first job out of uni is really the be all and end all, but that's definitely not true. I think students put a lot of pressure on themselves to land their absolute dream career immediately. I mean, maybe I have, but it's not always possible. And I think sometimes students just need to take the pressure off themselves and just keep their mind open. One other thing that I wish I had known at university is how important it is to be your authentic self. So I remember going to some interviews for companies and almost putting on this persona of who I thought they wanted me to be. And, I'd progress through the interviews and then at the end realize that I didn't really fit in there and I didn't want to be working in that company or with those people, because the person I had been showing up to at the interviews wasn't necessarily my authentic self. And I mean, your career is a big part of your life, right? You want to make sure that the job that you have allows you to be exactly who you are.
Yeah.
And then in terms of starting work, I wish I was just a little bit more willing to accept help and to put my hand up and reach out, because again, the support is all there, the teamwork is there, because they want you to be successful and they really want the best for you. And so at times, especially when you're learning, you don't want to, sometimes it can be hard making yourself vulnerable and putting your hand up and asking for help, because it feels like you're undermining your own knowledge or your own worth. But it's definitely important to reach out when necessary and gain that support, because everyone's always willing to help you and make sure that you're being successful.
Yeah, definitely. Those are really good advice. And even for me, sometimes I definitely had a hard time asking for help, but I think asking for help will make your life so much easier, for sure. Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. Alrighty. I guess just two more questions. Actually, I was just gonna ask you as a recent graduate female student yourself, if you could give our female students just some advice, like general career or life tips, what would they be?
Well, again, I think, being authentic, I think that's absolutely the most important thing for me. I mean, in doing that, I found a company where I can show up to work every single day and be exactly who I am and feel so comfortable with that. I never have to feel like I'm pretending to be someone else or having to fit into an office environment. Everyone here are just great people. We all get along really well. It's a really lovely environment to work in. I think it's particularly for females, we can often sell ourselves short, or we can humbly downplay our own successes in comparison to, a lot of guys will just come in and say, I'm great at this, I'm great at that. But I think it's really important, particularly for females, to always back yourself really hard. You know your own worth, and it's important to promote that, particularly in any job or interview scenario. That you're not there to be humble, you're there to showcase your very best attributes. So it's really important, even though it might feel uncomfortable, it's really important to make sure that you're really selling your own successes and that you're really talking about your individual importance. Other than that, I think it's just really important to keep, especially always actually, not just when you're at uni, but to make sure that you're keeping a really open mind and that you're always looking for new opportunities. So this role I chanced upon and realised that, this is where I fit in and it was great. And I think it's really important to not just have a particular career or a roadmap that is, structured and detailed. Although that's great, it's also important to keep an open mind, to attend all of these networking events, all the career information sessions, to be a part of societies like this, to watch interviews like this. It's really important to keep an open mind and meet new people, build new relationships, and listen to what other people have to say.
Oh, definitely. 100% agree. Actually, I'll move on to my one last question. Just want to hear what you have to say about this question. So yeah, this is something that I found out because recently I attended like a women in business annual dinner, and this is one of the questions from a consulting company. So I want to hear what you have to say about the question. I mean, we don't have to include this in the interview. So the question they asked all the students is like, what is the most important things that company can do to support female employees at the start of their career? And I guess for you as well is what traits are you looking for when you are finding which company you want to work for?
So I'll start with the end of that question in terms of what companies I want to work for. Again, I think you can tell throughout the interview process how heavily, a lot of companies like to say that they value diversity and inclusion, but it's not always apparent. Again, in my experiences of interviewing for different companies, I'd ask them what they do to support women, and they wouldn't have any answers for me other than saying that they have a diversity and inclusion panel. But that really doesn't speak to much if there's no action being taken from that. Also, when you go into an office and you can't see much female representation, or where there's no interviewers who are female, I think that can also speak a lot about the values of the company. And then in terms of the support, so I've had great support from my company. As I mentioned earlier, we've got an affinity group that's targeted just to females. So Appian Women is a really inclusive space. We've got lots of networking within the company. They also sponsor different events. So things like information sessions or speaking series, different things like that, that we're encouraged to attend. And so Appian Women is not just for women are the members, but there's also allies. So it's not just about, specifically supporting women, but it's also opening up that conversation more broadly to encourage everyone to be supportive of gender inclusion. Other than that, there's also the other affinity group, Appian Rise, which is more targeted especially for people entering the workforce at, as a graduate or early on in their career, to ensure their continued support and development there. And I think generally it's just really important for women to feel supported and encouraged. And I've never had any experience of feeling undermined because of my gender. I've just fit in seamlessly. It's a non-issue really here. And I know that's fortunate because not everyone has that same experience. But it's been a really great opportunity for me.
Definitely. That sounds really amazing, having like a supportive network in your company. Because like definitely the people you work with every single day will be like your family because you spend so many hours with them. And it's definitely great to have a support system that you can always come to if you need any help, for sure.
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, definitely. I wish you all the best in your future aspiration and plans, for sure. Like it's really great talking to you and learn more about your career journey in Appian, for sure. It definitely inspired me to learn more about consulting. Definitely.
It's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So before we wrap up the episode of our podcast, are there any final things you want to say or share with our listeners?
No, that's it. Really, I think it's just I'm just proud of anyone who's getting involved in things like this as a student. I think it's really important to take responsibility for your own career and your own experience. Getting involved in things like this is fantastic. And yeah, as I said, just keep an open mind and keep up the involvement in all these different activities.
Yeah, perfect. So on behalf of WIC and all our members, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and share your experience. And it has been really good, like fantastic interview I've done. This is my first interview, but it's a really great interview and I definitely learned a lot from it. And it definitely encouraged me to see tech consulting because I will be very honest that I always felt like I have to be coding, I have to study computer science and software engineering to get into tech consulting. But after hearing about your story, I kind of felt like even me as an actuarial student can can pursue a career in tech consulting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the whole industry around software development is changing, where it's not necessarily just deep dive back end techies doing the implementation. The software itself is changing, so it's opening up avenues and opportunities for those of us who are still, problem solvers, STEM backgrounds, but allowing us to get involved in industries like this.
Yeah, definitely.